Now, as you know, using get users, you get all the data of the user. But what if you want to get only one record from the database? You might have more than 1000 records inside your MongoDB database. In that case, you won't grab all the records and then filter only one record from the list. Instead, you're going to make a request and get only the record what you want. So let's take a look at how we can get the individual user, or you can say the individual employee, using dynamic API routing. So inside these pages, as you know, we have the API, and to this API route, inside this, we have users. Now let's create another file here, and I'm going to name this file in the square bracket. And I'm going to name this file user id.js. Now you can see the name of this file is user ID. When we call this API, we need to pass value to this user ID parameter. Just for now, I'm going to just open the index.js. As you can see here, I have the MongoDB function and this import statement. I'm going to copy this, paste that right down here. And then I'm going to copy this handler function, this one, and then paste that right down here. I'm using the same handler function for this dynamic API file. Inside this, we need to check the type of request. So let me copy this and specify that right here. And we also want to add here a switch statement. So we pass here switch method, and inside this switch, we can add different cases. So on the first case, we check for the get request. If it is get request, then I'm going to return a controller from this first case. So let me create a controller inside this controller file. Right here, I'm going to create a new controller. So just after this get user, I'm going to say export async function. The name of the function is get user. Instead of get users, now I'm going to create a function called get user with request and response parameter. And then inside this get user, I'm going to first call the try and catch block. And inside the catch, simply going to say here response.status 404.json. And then inside this object, we pass error, which is cannot get the user. Just after that, inside this try, we need to first get the data from the URL. Let me first copy this URI and paste that here. And now if you want to make a get request for the individual data, you need to pass the user ID with the URI. So after the users, right here, you need to pass the user ID. So inside this try, we need to first get that user ID. To get that, I'm going to say constant user ID is equal to request.query. So using request.query, we get that user ID. And right down here, I'm going to say if we have the user ID, then I'm going to say constant user is equal to await. And then we need to say users, the schema dot find by ID. And inside this find by ID, you need to pass the ID. So here you need to say user ID. Just after that, you get the response inside this user variable. So let me just return that. So we pass response.status, which is going to be 200.json. And then we pass this user variable, this one. And if something went wrong, then I'm going to return a response.status 404.json. And inside an object, we pass error, which is user not selected. Just after that, let me save this, copy this get user, and we are using this get user inside this API route. So here I'm going to call this get user at the top inside this import statement, and then call that inside this case. And we need to pass here request and response parameter. After that, we need to break this statement. So we pass here break, and we need to call the default statement as well. So let me copy this default statement and specify that here. Just for now, I'm going to leave everything as it is. Save these changes. Just after that, I'm going to back to the index.js. Here, I'm going to copy this connection, this statement, and then I'm going to paste that right inside this file. Just after that, let me save all the changes. And then I'm going to open the Postman API testing tool to test this API. So let me first get all the users. So I'm going to select the get users and make a get request. When I click on the send button, you can see I'm going to get the data from the server. So I'm going to have 2 records inside my database. Now what I want to get only one record as a response from this get request. Let's suppose I want this second record as a response. I'm going to copy this ID and then specify that ID right here. When I make a get request again, you can see I'm only going to get that individual record as a response. Now you can do the same thing in the browser as well. If you open your application and if you type that URL right here, when you press enter, you can see you're going to get the response inside the browser as well. So this is the individual data you can get with the API route. So you just need to pass the ID of the user in the URL. If I copy first ID, this one, in the URL right here, then I'm going to get the data of the first user. When I press enter, you can see this is going to return the first user as a response. Now let me just back to my application. Now if you want, you can do the same thing for put request as well. So if you back to the controller, then you can notice inside this put user, inside this you can get the user from the user ID variable. As you know, the name of the file is user ID. So when you pass ID in the URL, this statement is going to return that value to this user ID. And you can also do the same for this delete user. We are just getting the value from the user ID. So we can call both these controllers inside this user ID API route. So let me just copy this delete and this put case and then specify that right down here. And then we need to import both these controllers right up here, something like this. Let me get rid of this post user because we are not using it. Let me save the changes. And now you can test both this request and check the result.